See the screen okay?
Yes, that looks good.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. And as much as you're honored to have me, I'm honored as well to be here with you all this evening. One of my favorite things to talk about is soil. And that's, the foundation that we lay our seeds into, our trees, all of the different living beings that we work with are nothing without the soil that we put them into. A little bit about me. I was an Army veteran, so I did a veteran to farmer training program and became an organic farmer. And so much of the information and knowledge that I learned about are so based on Indigenous teachings that it's, why are we calling it organic farming? We should be calling it Indigenous farming. But, thinking about some of the classes that I took when I was first starting out, I remembered our professor said, who came, raise your hand, who came here to learn how to be a farmer? And of course, like the entire classroom, we all raised our hands because we were there to become farmers. And she's like, you're all wrong. You came here to become soil builders. And, it completely changed my perception, even as an Indigenous person. It completely changed my perception on what the responsibilities are for soil building, as well as like thinking about the lineage that we all come from, regardless of the language that we speak, the places that we come from around the earth. We all came from a line of people who were taking care of the land that they lived upon. And whether that was through agriculture, maybe permaculture, but they had a way of stewarding and caring for the land around them. Right, so two of the things that we will be talking about, and these are going to, of course, break down to some more examples for everybody. I'll be talking a little bit about the land stewardship practices that we use at Dream of Wild Health and how we're building the soil and trying to continue to improve the soil that we work with. Because the soil, we demand so much from it. And, we have lots of people to feed, lots of youth, community around the Twin Cities area that we're trying to take care of on what was once just 10 acres of land, but essentially like less than half of that is actually in production. So creating and growing tons of food. So we're usually sitting at about 8 tons of food every year that we're able to produce on such a small scale. And then, of course, moving into the soil building blocks. Soil building blocks are everywhere. And of course, what I can go outside and see is very different from what maybe you can go outside and see, especially at this time of the year. I know there's still a blanket of snow covering the earth, and that's totally okay too. That's very much needed after we had such a harsh growing season last year. So for those of you who don't know, Dream of Wild Health is this amazing place where we grow seeds and we grow leaders. Our mission is to restore the health and well-being of the Native community by recovering knowledge of and access to healthy Indigenous foods, medicines, and lifeways. So Dream of Wild Health is located in Hugo, Minnesota, which is about 30 minutes northeast of Minneapolis. The community that we serve is, of course, within the Twin Cities area, where we have a very large Native urban population of more than 30,000 Native strong. And so we're specifically working more closely with the Phillips neighborhood, which is located on the Franklin Avenue Native Corridor. So the program, it includes bringing youth ages 8 to 18 out to our farm where they experience how to grow in the garden, how to forage wild plants, how to become a farmer, learn cultural teachings, whether they're Dakota or Ojibwe. And then they can bring all of those foods into the kitchen where they learn how to serve their peers, serve their community. And then also with our virtual culinary program, they're able to get those supplies brought to their home and they can make dinner for their family. So it's, trying to create a very full circle program where we can all be a part of food sovereignty. Like we all have a piece that we can carry forward, and things that we're able to gift the world with, the different blessings that we all have and carry. So thinking about the soil, it's not about necessarily what we're putting into the soil, but also what we're putting on top of the soil. So, with soil, there's erosion issues. I know there's a lot of scary statistics out there about the loss of topsoil, and topsoil is essentially that top layer of soil that our plants love to be grown in, where their roots develop into, but it's also can be the loosest soil that can blow in the wind, can wash away in the water, whether that's rain or snow. And then just our different farming techniques or how we go across that soil can affect everything about it. At Dream of Wild Health, we use several different pre-mixed blends of cover crop. So like our winter cover crop is the one on the far left. That's a winter rye with an oilseed radish and hairy vetch. So those three crops are not winter kill. And so that allows us to have not only cover for the winter, but then it sort of bounces back in just around this time of year. And what we have done, what we did last year was actually use that cover crop planting as our biomass for the soil in a roller crimping no-till planting that we did at the farm. In the center is what's more of a summer warm mix. It's got sunflowers, sorghum Sudan grass, and other things to sort of build up that biomass on top of the soil, preventing that wind erosion, and then also making sure that we have food for not only ourselves and the soil, but our pollinator relatives. And last, the current mix that we have on many of the fields this year is a winter kill recipe. So it's oats, field peas, and an oilseed radish. So all of those crops together, they all have their own little gifts that they're providing. We want to make sure that we have biomass to make sure we can lay stuff down on top of the soil to prevent that wind erosion. The radishes will help with compaction issues. So essentially they'll go down, they'll form their radish, get bigger and bigger, and then they'll decompose, leaving those pockets of humus or organic matter within the soil. I have used all of these cover crops in a clay soil, at a clay soil farm. So all of these cover crops do well, not only in, a silty loam, but they also do extremely well in clay. You just have to give it a chance. But they'll work some real magic and continue to help sort of naturally aerate your soil, but also add those pockets of organic matter too. Some of the cover crops that we'll add in, we're trying to be even more intentional with our cover crops. So as soon as something comes out, trying to get it immediately covered again. So some of the crops that we'll use for that are like our buckwheats. And then we've also used crimson clover and white Dutch clover for just to add some more nitrogen fixing elements. The crimson clover is really good at adding a phosphorus element. So if you have a phosphorus deficiency, crimson clover is a very good scavenger of that. And a scavenger cover crop is essentially a plant that you plant, or the crop that you plant. It goes down, its roots form. In the soil, we've got mycorrhizal fungi, and that fungi is able to help make sure that they're getting, I might be going too fast, Caitlin. So slow me down if I need to, or if I need to stop and explain something else. Again, I know I said I get really excited talking about soil. So if I'm going too fast, just stop me. Or if you have questions, let me know.
Well, that we do have, the chat is pretty active right now. So I had someone DM me, is the roller crimper used to tamp down the soil after seeding, or will it be used after the cover is grown?
Yeah, so I actually have an image of that next. So yeah, maybe I'll hold on the mycorrhizal fungi. But yeah, like the white Dutch clover, if you're looking for green manure or a walkway, that's an amazing cover crop to have. It's very heavy duty. It can take up to a lot of heavy traffic. I, of course, don't recommend to drive a dump truck over it repeatedly. But if you've got some light walking traffic, as well as your, a lawnmower or a walk behind tractor, and even a full-size tractor, it can really stand up to a lot of that beating. And of course, is adding nitrogen back into the soil. Yeah, so this is the roller crimper. The roller crimper is this beautiful piece of equipment. It is very heavy, but there are different models for this. You can either put it in the front of your tractor to sort of push your cover crop or any taller grasses straight down. And what it's essentially doing is it's not only terminating the cover crop. So instead of needing to use pesticides to get rid of a crop, you can lay it down. And then there's also the pull behind versions, which we have at Dream of Wild Health. And so you just pull it behind, it lays it all down nice and flat. And essentially what this is replicating is you laying garden mulch, whether that's hay, rice hulls, wood chips, whatever it is that you use as your mulch, you're essentially just using your cover crop as that. So it's keeping those root systems in the ground, which are then also making more organic matter in your soil, and also creating better soil structure or improving your soil structure. And then again, being able to have that instead of carrying bales of hay onto the field or whatever, however you do your farming. I hope that answers your question about the roller crimper.
Yes, and then I know Sue was wondering about that thing I'm sure we've all done when you let the radishes go a little too long and they get all woody. Does that mean you can just kind of leave them and that's good? Or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have, I use daikon radish not only at my home farm, but also at Dream of Wild Health. And so there's some that if I have a big sort of, you accidentally drop a little bit more seed than you planned on, I'll harvest some of those. They make like a really good kimchi, just something nice to slice up. They're really good roasted. I know a lot of our youth like to pull out the daikon radish and eat them straight in the field, for some of our youth who like spicy stuff. So you can use it however you want. But what you are looking for is to just let it sit in the ground and let it go. So it'll get to that woody stage. And then especially when it starts getting exposed to cold, and sort of that contraction or expansion of the radish by being frozen and then thawing out, will also create a nice pleasant rotting smell. So there is, that's one byproduct of it. But when you smell that, you know that it's working. You know that you're helping build up your soil, increase your humus and organic matter within your soil profile. All right, so moving on, the roller crimper, if anybody's interested, it can be used at many scales of farming. So it's not just a tractor implement. However, you can get ones that are actually flagged. So, it can go across probably 20 beds if you have the foldable version of the roller crimper. The roller crimper is also offered through BCS. So if you have a BCS walk behind tractor, that's also another implement that can be used. It's not quite as effective, however, it still works. And And there's a little bit of a learning curve when you're using the roller crimper. You have to time your crimp just right. So essentially as your biomass is starting to go to seed, like it hasn't officially seeded yet, but as soon as you start seeing those seed heads and you have a majority of seed heads in your grasses, that would be the time you would want to do that. So a plant, you can kind of see it here at the very bottom. They have a ryegrass here. And so the ryegrass has its seed head, but it hasn't opened yet. So a plant, regardless if it's a cover crop or a domesticated plant or even a wild plant, as a plant starts to go to seed, it starts putting all of its energy, excuse me, it starts putting all of its energy into the reproductive stage, or so into the seed head, which is also called like senesce, where the part of the body can be folded over. The crimps are like just at the right measurement to properly like sort of make a little crimp, just like we would in the 80s, you know, like pinch it, it sort of bends. And then it'll continue to do that and lay those cover crops down into a nice flat mulch that you can plant directly into. Another element that we use at the farm is compost. So we have a very large compost pile in the back that we kind of rotate through. It could be better managed, but that's one of those things that it's like you almost are able to set it and forget it. And then pretty soon the pile keeps sort of shrinking down as we add on to it. So that pile is managed by our bucket on our tractor, because it's easy to just flip it and turn it with the bucket instead of a shovel. We also in the center use little compost tumblers. That element is located right around the house, essentially the farmhouse, where youth eat or community members will join us to eat there. But the youth understand what elements go into that compost tumbler. So they all learn, you know, the do's and don'ts of composting, but then how all of that is going to get turned into soil or spread out onto the fields, depending on what stage it's at. And then, of course, we also import some composted manure from a dairy farm operation. So it is strictly composted. It's not composting in the field. So that's something you'll want to be mindful of depending on what it is that you're growing. If you're looking at incorporating like Food Safety Modernization Act or GAP standards, there's certain times when you can add your manure or composted manure before you can harvest a particular crop that's not going to be prepared or cooked, like something like lettuce. So something to keep in mind. At my home farm, I am a very small micro farm scale. So I have a flock of 12 Ancona ducks, 1 Cayuga duck, and 1 lonely chicken, who I use their bedding to move into a compost for a year. And after that, I move that into my areas of production. So it can be achieved at many different scales. So just because you don't have the equipment doesn't mean that you can't find a way to do it. And you'd be surprised. There are lots of people who maybe would want you to come and pick up their composted manure or even their manure that you could make a compost tea from. Again, it's something as an option. There's lots of ways to be resourceful. I know there's a couple horse farmers that are like, just come and pull up and I will load it in your truck. So there's lots of opportunity for that. And again, depending on your scale of operation or place where you can sort of manage that will vary, but lots of different opportunities with compost. Another element that we've added new this year is biochar. And so biochar is essentially trees, whether they're pulled from forest or it's leftover residue from agricultural production. It's essentially burned at a very low oxygen rate or oxygenated rate. There are ways you can do this at home. People use like old metal barrels, and they'll drill a couple holes into the bottom of it. If you lay it on its side, drill a few holes in the bottom so there's a little bit of air that can come in, and you set it on the fire. You've already loaded it with some wood, and you sort of let it slowly do its thing. Another thing that is very similar to this is if you look at your fire pit, or even your stove, a wood burning stove at home, you might still have those little pieces of char, and that stuff is liquid gold or solid gold. But it's a charcoal substance that you can add to your garden. You can not only add it to your garden, but you can add it to your potting mix. And you can also add it, like for us, we're going to be adding it to our different tree plantings that we'll have this year. So it's a very, very good amendment. Ultimately, what this particular product is doing is not only improving the health of the plant that it's supporting, but it's also able to pull that atmospheric carbon back down into the soil. And so we talk about, for I think most of my life, I have heard about the hole in the ozone layer or the greenhouse gases, like so many things about our atmospheric air and what that's doing to our atmosphere. And so that's all caused by us not being able to complete that circle, where there's things that are being extracted from the earth, and it doesn't have a way to come back directly. So biochar is one of those elements that are helping pull that back down. There is no current data on like how long the carbon can actually get pulled in and be held in those pieces of charcoal. But estimates right now are more than 100 years. And so, you're helping build the soil by completing that circle, but you're also helping the improvement of your plants. You can see the one picture where there are two little conifer treelings. The one on the left is one that was not planted with biochar, and the one on the right was planted with. So you can kind of see the difference of what it's doing and helping in your soil. I kind of made reference to it, was the mycorrhizal fungi. Caitlin, is that something it's okay for me to get into?
I mean, always, forever.
All right.
But I do have questions that we could answer quick before we move on.
Sure.
So someone was wondering about the ash from a wood burner. Does that work? Is that as good as the biochar you're talking about? Yeah,
absolutely. Myself, I not only use biochar even at my home farm, but I also do a lot of fires because I've been doing a lot of brush removal and invasive tree removal, so that all of that ash ends up getting put back into the soil. And it depends on the plant. My corn and squash haven't had any problems with it. My beans like to come in after something else has been in the ash. So in that crop rotation, they really, it's something that the beans really enjoy, but after one year. So it's something that you can add. If it's hardwood ash, I always use that to nixtamalize my corn, and then whatever's left gets put back into the earth, whether that's getting an area prepped or it's, just trying to feed the soil. So definitely use any resources you have on hand, because there's always something you can do with it. Nothing is ever a waste.
And again, on that topic, Kelsey's wondering, how much biochar do you add to your tree seedling mix?
So I ordered it by a ton because we have a big tree planting that we're about to embark on. And so essentially you'll want to charge your biochar. So you wouldn't want to just take it and throw it in. You could take it and wet it with some water. You could also add it to your finished compost. And again, you're like watering it. So it's almost like just when you're about to start seeds, where you want to wet some of your mix. So it's like, so it's not completely dry. It's that same thing. So we haven't quite made it to a science because the biochar just arrived at the farm. So we missed our seedling start last week with that element. But like coming into this week, we've got, we'll be incorporating the biochar with our compost and potting mix. So that way we have more of an amped up charge going in for even our annual production. So right now I'm going with like essentially 33% of each. So we've got 33% potting mix, and that's even closer to 40. And then the last part of compost and the biochar. So we'll see what happens. I will definitely test it, and I will let Caitlin know sort of what ratio is working for us. I think a lot of it depends on the other potting mix that you have for the type of soil that you're planting directly into.
Okay, and then going back to the crimper, so someone was wondering if there's the scaled down version since they don't have a tractor. I know you said there is. Is there any more you could add about options for smaller scale?
Yeah, so the very first roller crimper that I used was something that I bought, that I just bought at the home improvement store. And it was this old piece of steel that was sort of like a elbow shape. It was approximately 2.5 feet long. And so I took a thin tow strap, put it underneath it, and then I let the wedge, the wedge is like this. I put the tow strap underneath here. So I held it with both hands and just stepped on it. That does take quite a bit of time. However, it's super cheap. It was less than $5. And then I had it fitted. It was 2.5 feet. So I was able to get through my raised beds and sort of use that same model on that scale. So definitely use what you can, as long as you have some form of steel to be able to sort of make that crimp, the better. And it's all about timing, and it's also about just having fun and experimenting what you can do with it. But yeah, any piece of old steel will work.
Excellent, miigwech. And then we had a couple people interested in manure. Is that something you're going to be talking about more in a bit, or?
No, but I can talk about it now.
Okay, because people were wondering about, of course, the best manure to use, wondering about bison manure. Would cow, horse, rabbit work? Anything you could say about that?
Very cool. So yeah, of course, you want to make sure that whatever animal you're using has is coming from a healthier source. So the only animal that I wouldn't take compost from is a cat. And so, yeah, I'm taking it that small scale for anybody who's a cat owner. That the cat has like different vectors or diseases found within their waste that is not fit for human consumption, no matter how much you compost it or for how long. I know in my mom's experience, she had a dog waste pile. And then she had all of these beautiful wild plant relatives were like able to absorb that runoff from it. And then we're growing like so beautifully. I don't know, with those wild plant relatives are not consumption relatives. So we just kind of watched it and we're like, wow, that's amazing what it's able to do. Bison compost is really good. I I've even purchased the like dry bison compost manure. And so incorporated that into a compost tea. Like any type of manure, essentially if it smells like ammonia, or it smells like some other type of waste, then you know it's not completely finished. What you're trying to achieve is allowing it to do its thing. Even if you have a small element that you're adding into your existing compost pile, it'll help break that down and sort of get it to the point that it's a usable material again. There are some people, and again, I think a lot of it depends on what you're going to be putting it on. If it's something that you cannot eat raw, like you have to prepare it, you can definitely do that, but it's also being cognizant of the time between putting it down or top dressing your crops with it and then your harvest time. So it's a really good thing to even put down in the fall. And then that way it can sort of sit there in the winter time, do its thing underneath, hopefully a bed of cover crops, but do its thing, break down, and then build up for the next year. So you've got at least like a 6-month turnaround before you're trying to put anything else into the ground there. I know there are folks that have taken like those old, I don't know if I think some orange companies still do that, where they've got like that nylon, very thin plastic mesh bag. And so there are people I know who have taken that mesh style bag, filled it with, cow pies or bison pies, and then have let that steep in the sun in like a 5-gallon bucket of water. And in a couple days, they'll take out the bag of pie, and then use that water to, be able to fertilize whatever it is that they're trying to fertilize. So just be cautious of what you're trying to do. Like if you know you have a really good source of composted manure, that's the best. But again, making sure you have your timing right, and sort of playing with it. It takes a lot of experimentation and a lot of getting things wrong for us to get things right. I will say that too. I've made so many different mistakes that have turned into learning opportunities and teaching moments, that it just makes it so much easier. The other thing you have to consider is your environment. So maybe what works well in the grow zone by Dream of Wild Health may not necessarily work for your grow zone up there, or wherever you're calling in from. So definitely stay open-minded about it and don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't work out. You just got to keep trying and not give up.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for all your questions, and I'll keep writing them down. If Jessica, you want to talk about mycorrhizal fungi.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I'll talk about it in just a moment, Caitlin. I think we've got a good point for that. So, also not only what plants you're planting into your soil, whether that's your cover crops or your actual cash crop, everything that you plant, you want to make sure you cover. And so we use a lot of wood chips at Dream of Wild Health. We also use a lot of straw mulch, and make sure it's like weed-free straw mulch, or else you might have a new problem on your hand with different weed seeds that can find their way into your garden. But both of these elements allow that additional layer of not only decomposition and adding different elements back into your soil, but it's also an opportunity for you to reduce your water usage or conserve water by keeping the soil covered, keeping it cooler, and then also the ability to retain some of that moisture. So thinking of the dew in the morning or the morning transpiration of plants, all of that moisture can just stay within the soil underneath both of these elements. So something else to consider for your mulch. And this is what Dream of Wild Health will look like in 15 years. So for those of you who have not been to our farm before, I would encourage you to sign up for a tour, or maybe there's an opportunity for us to do a skill share between the Gitigaan program and Dream of Wild Health. But we are incorporating agroforestry into our production. And so we purchased 20 acres of property, less than a quarter mile away from our existing 10-acre property. And this property will be, agroforestry, where we have the perennials on both sides of our annual production. And those different elements are, oh my God, so many different trees that we're bringing on. So fruit and nut, trees, bushes, little bit of everything. So all of these spaces not only create more diversity and environments for pollinators and wildlife, but they're also another form of economic production. So being able to layer all of that into one space is, I think so many people are calling it the new way to farm. But it's the way our ancestors farmed. If you want to find an old native civilization, you look to where you can find those like acorn producing oaks and maybe wild plums or choke cherries. Like when you start seeing those, you know that there was a village there or a village nearby. So, adding these elements back in, making sure that we're using reduced till is just going to be better for the earth, our planet, and our future generations. My little spiel about mycorrhizal fungi is this amazing fungus that lives in the soil. And sometimes we need to put it there, and other times it already exists. So the more diversity that we can add on top of the soil, or what we can see, will mirror down below the Earth's crust or the Earth's surface. And what happens is, I'm going to pretend that Caitlin and I are, Caitlin, I'll be the corn, you can be the tree. And I'm the corn, and I'm like, Caitlin, do you have any nitrogen over there? And you're like, yeah, but I don't know how to get it to you. And so this mycorrhizal fungi pops up in the middle of the soil, and it's like, oh, you need some nitrogen? And like, Caitlin, what do you need in exchange for the nitrogen? And you're like, maybe some more carbon. And it's like, well, I can't get the carbon from the corn, but I know where else I can get it. So mycorrhizal fungi is like the middleman for all of these different deals. And when they're present, everybody stays happy. Everybody gets what they need, but they're also forming relationships with all of the other plant life in between. And so connecting, thinking about the connections below the soil, that's not just our plant relatives and their extreme intelligence. It's also with the help of another element of life that we don't see with our naked eye. And so it's such a beautiful thing to see when you have that element there, because everybody is working in concert like they normally do, but it's like the additional bonus gift to have that fungus do that middleman work, so our plant relatives don't have to work so hard. I feel like that might make sense. Maybe not.
I love that explanation, and
right.
Yeah, Bruce has good explanation too.
Okay, perfect.
And I'll always be a tree to your corn.
Right. And I guess I'll always be the corn. So thinking about our soil building blocks. So I shared a lot about what we're doing at Dream of Wild Health with some of the elements that we can find on the landscape, and then also elements that we've had to bring in from outside. So that's just given our current environment, but I know up north, there are different elements that you need to consider when building up your soil. And one of them, especially with clay soil, is the reducing of compaction. And so some of the ways that that's done is through aeration of the soil. So this is, of course, two different methods of mechanical aeration. But, like if you're looking for a biological solution to this, like definitely consider our different radish relatives, whether that's the tillage radish, the daikon radish, or even like something smaller that can continue to break that plow pan and can continue to break through like that top foot or 18 inches of soil to like start getting more into the nutrient bank below. I know you guys are using rice hulls, which I think is so awesome. I wish we had that type of production that we could also be incorporating that, because there are just so many benefits to this. Rice hulls, you can use them fresh or freshly hulled. You can also incorporate them into a biochar. So if you wanted to burn them and then add them, there are so many ways to use it. So I think that's awesome. I'm all for finding the most resourceful ways to do something, because thinking about our ancestors, nothing was wasted. And so how can we be more resourceful with what we do and how we're doing something, even if we have to be real life mycorrhizal fungi? Like, I don't need that, but I know somebody else who does. So I'll take that and I'll give you this in exchange, like however you want to do that. I think it's so important for us to start bringing back that bartering and trading with one another. So that way we're all happy and nothing goes to waste. Of course, leaves. I kind of just let my leaves hang out on the soil for additional ground cover. But I think we all know somebody who is raking up their leaves every year, putting them into a plastic bag for it to go into the trash. If you see that, or someone who has extra leaves, that's an opportunity for you to use another element of natural mulch. So of course, the whole leaves, those are most likely going to blow away. But you can take them, you can mulch them up, or you can even lay the leaves down and then wet them with some water to try to get them to soak down, or cover them with a tarp. So lots of different ways to keep them in place. The mulch leaves, I've used a leaf blower on the sucking version. So it'll sort of chop up the leaves, then you empty the bag on where you want it to go. And then of course, 1 year later, you've got this amazing, it can be a little goopy, but it's, if you can catch it in between the mulch and the 1 year, you still have like some really good chopped leaves that you can just lay on. When you're mulching with leaves, you'll still want to have quite a bit of space. So it's not just a sprinkling, it's more of like 4 inches of it for it to be truly effective. And then I heard you all were interested in some water plants. Oh my God, there are so many things about our water plant relatives that I never even realized until I started looking into it. And so now I'm really excited about, the incorporation of water plants. So of course you do have to do your research. There are some water plants or algae or different duckweeds that are better for different uses. So overall, your green algae is going to be good for a biofertilizer. So that can be harvested fresh, that can be laid out. There are so many different ways you could incorporate them, whether that's liquid, solid, or even into your compost. So with all the different microbiological activity within the algae and the environment it comes from, it can also speed up your compost pile. So maybe you have a compost pile that's just not really doing anything. You can jumpstart it with a little bit of this and it'll come back to life. It will also improve soil aeration. So if it's something that you're trying to incorporate into your farming style, maybe you're already doing the radishes, or maybe you're doing that mechanical aeration of the clay soil, you can also incorporate this onto your grow space. And again, that microbial activity will just start doing its thing. I did see a recommendation that if you do, if you are going to use that, the way to sort of supercharge that is to do a little bit of mechanical aeration. Maybe it's just a little pitchfork that you're using, but doing that and then topping it off with the algae is the best. I think my favorite find on algae was actually due to its antifungal properties. It can actually be used as a seed soak. And so thinking about maybe you're working with older seed or maybe there was a fungal issue in the past, you could soak your seeds in that with some water and let them do its thing, which I thought was so amazing. So again, I think it's a great opportunity for people to incorporate that into their plan. But I will say, just be respectful about the way that you're harvesting. I know you all have good intentions around the work that you're doing, but just being responsible about the harvesting. It's something that we'll probably always have, but we need to be respectful and responsible with how we forage and the amounts that we're foraging. So there we go. Any questions?
Yes, a couple multi-tiered questions. Miigwech again for all of that. And I love seeing everyone being so excited about soil and everything that goes into it. It feels so good to think about using the resources we have and taking care of the earth. All right, so on algae, someone was wondering, can you create algae from hugelkultur or water catchment systems?
So I would probably recommend the water catchment system. I don't have, unless you have a different growing environment that I do, my hugelkultur systems don't really create any algae, but it could just be some of the other stuff I have in there. So I think there are more responsible ways. Again, like look to see what's best for your ecosystem that you live in or live around. And find what's the most responsible way to do that.
Okay, and then jumping back to cover crops, someone was talking about, when they're growing their vegetables in rows, does it make sense to have a cover crops between those rows? And then as far as managing them, should you be mowing or cutting them between the rows if they're getting too tall or starting to bloom?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So what we do at Dream of Wild Health, especially in our seed garden, is cover crop walkways. And so essentially, just so you all have an idea, it's essentially the beds are the exact same size. So we have our, bed 1 is an area of production, bed 2 is cover crop, bed 3 is another area of production. And what's going to happen for this year is that 1 and 3 are now cover crop rows, and bed 2 is now the bed of production. So it's giving each of those spaces sort of a year in fallow or a year to rest. It also cuts down on the erosion, but I would definitely recommend a clover, like the white clover is a good traffic carpet. And then you can also use that as a nitrogen fixer for your incoming crop for the next year. So yeah, it works really well. You do have to be very intentional about how you want to do it. And again, it's one of those things that it's like, it didn't work this year, so now I can try it again. So yeah, just being patient with yourself and being kind to yourself when you are trying to transition your garden or your grow space into that. And yes, Marilyn, it is less weeding, I promise.
Okay, and while we're on cover crops, can you use them super small scale to improve soil quality of something like a raised bed?
Definitely. So yeah, I use cover crops everywhere. So not only thinking about covering our soil or blanketing as well as we can, but using it even as an intercropper. And so thinking about like, let's say you have a 2-row planter, and maybe you're planting corn in your first little hopper. And then in the next hopper, you're using, maybe it's hairy vetch, or another nitrogen fixing cover crop. So you could put the 2 of them in there and interplant them. Depending on, again, that takes a little bit of patience with being able to understand or have a relationship with the seed that you're growing, or the seed that, you're considered your cash crop, I guess, is knowing how that one likes to be planted. So I have a corn that really enjoys being planted with cover crop, and I have another one that does not. And so I have to keep, I'll do instead 4 rows of corn, and then on my cover crop, I have to leave it out like 7 inches away from my corn, my outside corn rows, if that makes sense, and then put the cover crop down. So instead I have to mulch in those spaces that keep the corn away from the cover crop. So, cover cropping is great. I can't speak highly enough about it, but there is a little bit of a learning curve. Again, it can be a little bit challenging and maybe a little daunting at first, but just start very small. Start small, and then you can sort of see like what that's doing and how that's affecting your grow space. So, but when you're thinking about your winter, putting your growing space or your production space to bed for the winter, you'll want to almost overseed because you're just going to let it do its thing. So yeah, lots to play with and lots to experiment with.
All right, and we are getting close to the end, so thanks everyone for being here. And I have a couple more questions if you're able to stand for a couple more minutes, Jessica. Sure. There was one from earlier that's a few different questions in one. Do you test pH level, and what do you recommend for Three Sisters? And then what do you use for fertilizer?
Yeah, so all great questions. I will use a fish emulsion for fertilizer if needed, but generally that's not something I'll do. So yeah, fish emulsion, like for transplants and some of those heavier feeding corn, they really appreciate it. For, let's see, what was it? What were the other parts of the question, Caitlin?
Testing the pH, and then what do you recommend for Three Sisters? So I'm not sure if that person's still here, so maybe they could be more specific about the Three Sisters. I'm not totally sure what they're looking for.
Yeah, and the Three Sisters, again, that's a learning curve unless somebody gifts you exactly the 3 seeds that need to go together. So again, that's something to be patient with yourself with. You'll want to go with the corn, and then 2 weeks later, you're going to want to plant your beans, and those beans cannot be full runner beans or full pole. You'll want to do like a semi-pole or semi-runner or half runner bean, or else it can choke out your corn. And then, of course, for the squash, you want anything but a pepo or anything that will vine and sort of grow out and make that nice little ground cover. And pH, a lot of my, we of course are doing a soil test because we do that every couple of years at Dream of Wild Health. But I do not, they're needed, they're necessary, but I rely a lot more on plant health. And so I look to see what weeds are coming up, what those weeds look like. Do they have streaking in them? There are a lot you can learn by the plants that are volunteering to pop up next to the plants that you planted. So yeah, I look for lamb's quarter, purslane. Yeah, mostly those two. If you see those, you know that you have fertile soil. And so as long as there's no discoloration, then you know that your micronutrients are also in balance. So there's, like if you have more questions about it, I would definitely encourage you to apply to be at the Dream of Wild Health Farm next year for our seasonal staff, and would love to be able to share that and get those out into community, just all the different, all the things that we can learn by just observing our plant relatives.
Okay, and then last question quick. So someone just wondering about starting their background compost bin now. Do you have any tips or tricks to speed up composition? So I'm not sure if they mean speeding up the breaking down process or speeding up the layers. Maybe you could talk about both briefly.
Yeah, so just like the biodiversity between each of us on this call, we all have things we like, we all have things we dislike, or maybe don't favor, but your compost bin needs to be just like that. If you eat 3 things every single day for the rest of your life, like there will be things that you're deficient in, just like our compost bin would be. So we want to think about having that biodiversity on our own plate, and giving that same biodiversity to our compost. The best way to do it is to ensure that you have a good carbon source. So maybe it's old leaves from that neighbor who tries to throw away the leaves in the fall, or it's paper shred, hay, straw. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit of animal bedding. Yeah, just a high carbon source, so something that's dry. And then your, all of your nitrogen, which is essentially all your food scraps. Make sure that they're raw veggies, and then you sort of lasagna layer things in. You are going to put a little bit more carbon in than you will the wet foods, or even coffee grounds. But the best way to know if you have enough carbon is to add your food, take a big whiff, and get that smell in your nose, and then add a little carbon, take another whiff, and as soon as that smell goes away, then you know you've added enough carbon. I guess there's the possibility of adding too much carbon, but as soon as you don't smell that food smell, then you know you're good. So that's sort of one of the easiest ways to manage your compost pile. And as long as you have enough carbon, it'll keep doing its thing and working.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for hanging on a few extra minutes. I am so glad everyone had such great questions and a lot of enthusiasm for this topic. Anything else you wanted to add, Jessica? Folks can feel free to leave. I know we're over time, but anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm just very honored to be here with you all again. So hopefully I can make time this growing season to come up and see the gardens.
Yes.
Really awesome to see the facilities up there. So thanks again for having me, and best of luck with your growing seasons. Lots to learn out there. We all just need to do our part to create food sovereignty within our communities.
Miigwech, Jessica, for being here. And yeah, again, this session was recorded. So if folks want to revisit it, it'll be posted on the Fond du Lac Band's YouTube channel. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week. We'll talk more about plant medicines with Market Mary. So, miigwech, everyone.